All right, we're going to do a little thing here with strategic bombing and total war. We first talked about total war way back in 8th grade. General Sherman there and his march to the sea destroyed everything in a 60-mile swath all the way from Atlanta to the coast. We are now going to see how that is reflected in World War II and the concept of strategic bombing. Rules of land warfare. People felt there were actually rules of war you should follow. Quote, among civilized nations, the conduct of war is regulated by certain well-established rules known as the rules of laws of war. So, one, principle of military necessity. Do you have to do it in order to win? Period. Principle of humanity. Are you doing it in the most humane way possible? That's the difference between, I guess, shooting people and using poisonous gas. Poisonous gas has been outlawed because it violates the principle of humanity. And then the principle of chivalry, not doing any more harm than you have to and valuing human life. And so that's the concept of peace of God, where there are certain ways we need to act, and total war, where everything is free game. Now, back in World War I, there is a German bomber. Such things happen accidentally in war. So that's where we're going to begin. The London Blitz. We talked about that in class. I hope you remember something about that. The ruthless bombing from the air of civilians in unfortified centers of population has sickened the hearts of every civilized man and woman. If you go down to the bottom, this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We are not involved in the war, but we want to affirm its determination that if armed forces shall in no event and under no circumstances undertake the bombardment from the air of civilian population. So before we're involved, that is our official position on the issue of do you strategically, and strategic bombing basically means the city is a target. Everything in that city is fair game. We need to compare that to Operation Thunderclap. You know, these are quotes that I've pulled from top secret documents that are no longer top secret. Attack on German civilian morale. And I hope we know what morale means. So obviously I didn't put the whole thing in here because I'm going to start with point 7. So this is what we want to happen when we target these 60 cities. So one of the things we want to accomplish, it must be delivered in such density that it imposes as nearly as possible as 100% risk of death. In layman's terms, the goal is to kill everybody there in the city that we are bombing. 2, the weight of the attack has to have the same effect as some sort of natural disaster, whether it's a flood, hurricane, a tornado, whatever. 3, the target should involve the maximum association, both traditional and personal. So we don't want to just blow up large cities. We want to blow up large cities that have some sort of historical or social connection to that country. In the United States, that's places like New York City and Washington, D.C. The selected should embrace the highest density of population. So if you go back to 1, we want to kill everybody's there, and now back to 4, we want to find places where there are more people for us to kill. And finally, the attacks of this nature are going to have maximum effect when the population feels that their government is powerless to prevent a repetition. So we want the Germans, this is the attack on the morale, you can't stop us. We will kill as many of you as we want whenever we want. The only way out is for you to get your government to surrender. Total devastation. Now this is way on down, we were looking at 7. Total devastation would offer proof of modern bomber force. So basically they're referring to the Russians and what's going to happen post-war. So one of the reasons we did this on the Eastern Front is to show the Russians the power that we and the British have, and basically telling them, don't mess with us. This is what you have to look forward to after the war if you try. Strategic bombing. The Americans chose to bomb in daylight. There are obvious advantages for that. You can see what you're doing. The British chose to bomb at night. There are obvious advantages to that. The enemy has a harder time seeing you. You kind of see the difference. 2/3 not within 5 miles of the target, 1/3 only within 1,000 feet of their target. And again, that's the city center. We don't have the technology to pick out that building or that part of the compound. Now, obviously, one of the problems with bombing in daylight This is Arthur Harris, British Bomber Command. It has been decided that the primary object of operations shall be focused on the morale of the enemy's civilian population. This guy is going to take it to the absolute extreme, and he's going to try to pull the Americans along with him. A little story: during the war, he was pulled over by a police officer for speeding. He was going drastically over the speed limit, and the police officer said something to the effect of, and his response was, "Let's figure out what a firestorm is." These are wooden cities, so we use high explosives to blow up the wooden buildings, create burning material, and then incendiary bombs, which are fire bombs. Hurricane level winds, you know that heat rises. You actually create a tornado but made of fire. You can see the temperatures sucking the oxygen right out of your lungs. That's what happens when you get hurricane level winds. The worst is Hamburg, 45,000 died. But if you take a look at this, you can see as the hot air, as it heats up and it pulls the air up, the cold air will rush in at the bottom, and that's also the cold air that used to be in people's lungs. At the point of attack, you will be incinerated. The heat, the lack of oxygen, there's lots of various different ways you can die in a firestorm. There's the destruction. We're going to take a look at one particular case, Dresden. This was a city in eastern Germany. No anti-aircraft guns because it had not been targeted yet in the war. It's obviously very beautiful, or was. It is again. Because it hadn't been targeted, refugees went there, large number of American POWs. The factories are on the suburbs, so when you target the center of the city, that's not what you're hitting.
German troops into counterattacks against the Russian army not many miles to the east. This strike put a stop to that. The night sky is pitted with aircraft, vari-colored target markers, and the newest German ack device, a scarecrow designed to burst and look like a plane exploding after a direct hit. Static electrical discharge caused by intense cold mars these magnificent bombing shots. The day after the RAF strike at Dresden, B-17 bombers of the 8th United States Air Force gave the city a repeat performance. After these attacks, the German Overseas News Agency said, "This city, hitherto almost untouched, has been carpeted by heavy and super heavy high explosives and incendiaries. Dresden is a heap of ruins. It has been smashed to atoms."
So there is a picture from the Opera House looking down at the destroyed city after the fact. Dehousing the Germans. 3 attacks. The United States will be involved in the 3rd attack. Incredible temperatures. They had done studies and they knew when to hit. The 2nd attack 3 hours later, because that's the average time that your ambulance and fire will start showing up. And then the United States came in 10 hours later, because that's the average time it takes people to get their stuff together and start hitting the roads to get out of town. Obviously, trying to maximize the most amount of damage and casualties at one time. I'm not going to read that for you, but I want you to hit the pause. It's talking about the fact that at some point we need to stop this, not because it's morally wrong, but if you look at the bottom, we are going to come in possession of a totally ruined country. So here's going to be the assignment. You will download the Google Doc. There are 12 potential bombing targets. 1 means you can't justify bombing this target at all. 10 means it's perfectly justified in bombing the target. 5 is not allowed. You cannot put 5 on any of the targets. So obviously I'll see how well you paid attention by the number of people that put down 5. That's just gutless, not willing to make a decision. We're going to discuss your reasoning the next time in small groups, if I can get that thing to work in Zoom, as well as whole group. And of course, everything will always come back to this.